October, November, and maybe even December 2019. I think that was something very, very special.
Yeah.
And I think it was special because it was my first encounter with domestic issues only.
Yeah.
There were no flags. There was no rooting for any other team. It was really just looking in and saying, we can fix our problems ourselves. That's special.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, and I agree with you, it's hard to give it a proper name because I think revolution, looking back in time, it may not be the right word, but it was a revolt at least.
Definitely.
And it was an uprising.
Yeah.
Maybe revolution brings with it certain emotion and maybe expectation. So
I feel that the revolution is a fait accompli. So
right. So you would expect the change
what's
to
the
happen.
end product? Yeah, there's
Right.
no big change that happened.
Exactly. But it was a massive uprising that swept the nation. And there were days that I was wandering around Martyrs Square with my microphone looking for people to talk to. Many of these people we know, they're fixtures on the politics scene. They were in Martyrs Square. And then silence because you were on TV. So it's almost like it's Hollywood-esque. Thousands of people chanting flags and then silence because you're talking. And I saw you. You would speak about...
Me personally?
Well, I mean, you're doing your show.
Yeah.
And I was mesmerized by the fact that you could have many people from different backgrounds, different political backgrounds, different ideas, all tuning in, and you're part of the story, and we're all engaging in this moment together. And I believed in that. I thought this is the way out. I don't think today that that's the case.
Yeah.
I think the answers, unfortunately, are not here. And the reason I say that is because it's not the first time Lebanese have tried to change things. It's actually happened too many times. I remember 2015, 2005 now is history, but it was also a very important moment.
Yeah, definitely.
And very important figure like Michel Aoun came back. And that's... Jaja's out of jail, the Syrians are leaving. Now we talk about these figures in ways that are toxic. We don't think of, but back then it wasn't the case.
Definitely.
And today, I don't think the answers are on the street. I think the street tried. I think they tried very hard. I saw it myself. I think a lot of us witnessed what looked like something happening that didn't happen.
I need to contest you on this issue. I'll begin from a step back. I believe the problem in Lebanon, now Hezbollah compiles on the problem, is another confessional party, but carrying weapons. So it's with the turbocharge. But the problem comes from way before. The civil war in Lebanon happened before Hezbollah, but then we had the end of a war, not in the best ways. We don't know why the war ended in 1990. The Syrians left us with this kind of regime. Not only the Syrians, with Saudi Arabia and the United States, the whole status quo that remained until the invasion of Iraq, and then we had our problem.
Mismanaged by Syria, but we were part of the story.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So one needs to ask him or herself, so how come this confessional system that we all acknowledge, even those in confessional parties acknowledge, that brought us war and brought us massacres, sustained itself for 40 and 50 years, and even going back longer? Here is my own prognosis. So the problem is now that you cannot sustain a political system without creating this feeling of common sense, making people believe that the status quo, which is very specific and very particular for very particular political reasons, is not so. It's just common sense. Things just go that way. And that's why I believe that our biggest problem is that people have no agency in Lebanon. So they watch politics as if they're watching a football game. So they feel that they cannot influence the outcome. And that is the biggest problem brought to us by the regime. Our confessional regime has a specialization in manipulating fear, specifically with our memories going back to the Civil War. So our fears are legitimate. They are not just manipulating fears out of the blue. No, they are legitimate. We had the Civil War, we had massacres, and they were confessional. The problem now is, my problem with the 14th of March moment and the 8th of March moment, these two moments, both shared a common belief. They told us back then, and I was a demonstrator in the 14th of March back then, we believed it, really we did, that our problems come from abroad. Let the Syrians go. Even the 8th of March is
to the
other side of the coin.
Right.
So they were saying that it's Saudi Arabia, it's Israel. Our problems come from abroad.
Or from the Gulf. Or
Yeah. So I believe that the 17th of October movement or moment is a break with the 14th and 8th of March narratives, or one narrative that came to say that we have many problems with abroad, whichever this abroad may be, but our main problem comes from within. This political system has the fruits of its own failure, and it gets aggravated by this abroad, by this other. But we have this problem internally. My fear, to just end this long sentence, is that yes, the 8th and 14th of March internal camps got just scattered around, and we don't have these two blocks as they were. But we never had an internal 14th and 8th of March camps, just internally. They were a reflection of a foreign policy, quote-unquote, position. Were you in the Mu'tadilin camp or Mumana camp?
Yeah.
So now, the same line still divides the different political parties. They have many problems now with the regime that has collapsed. They are just picking on each other who's to blame. But on regional issues, they fall in line again. My fear is that going at Hezbollah, because I'm all for Killun Yani Killun. Hezbollah is one of them amongst this political class that is sustaining a sectarian system that is just moving on our bodies. I believe that. My problem is that picking on Hezbollah from his armaments before having a state project, not a state, a project for a state, to pick on Hezbollah and debate Hezbollah on this party's internal program. What can Hezbollah answer me on the currency rate, on our monetary status, be it my salary, be it the economic problem, be it the independent judiciary, being corruption in Lebanon. On these issues, Hezbollah doesn't have an answer, until now at least. And none of the sectarian parties have an answer. And the reason is quite clear for me. Confessional parties are vertical social camps. They cannot answer on horizontal problems like how should we distribute the losses, because these losses would cut their parties tabaqiyan, let's say, class-wise. So this problem, Hezbollah is more vulnerable to, and more, I feel, urgent to answer on, because the problem of his armaments is always a problem. I cannot just delay the whole social debate until this question might be solved, especially if the answer is that we don't have an internal solution for this problem. We should wait for a regional solution. So this wait might remain for 100 years. In this meantime, we have an internal problem with Hezbollah and with other political parties. My own solution is to debate Hezbollah on what state are you promising your own fighters, your own adherents, for their sacrifices to be worth a country that is worth living in. Because if you don't have a state project, then the resistance is an end in itself. It's not a means to an end in having a better state. or a better living as a society. That's my whole problem. Maybe it's too long.
No, I'll say one thing. I wish I had a notepad.
You have many things.
So much, and you're gonna have to help me remember everything because there's a few points
We'll go through and through.
Yeah, as long as I don't miss the central point in any case. I like the way you're laying it out, and I will try to elaborate where I disagree, at least in terms of maybe it's the foundation, maybe it's the honing in as opposed to exploring everything that happened.
Yeah.
And I'll elaborate here. Let me go back to the initial part of the thread. I don't, and we said this earlier, we're both fans of Fawaz Trablsi, and his book is here, History of Modern Lebanon. We both admire him.
Yeah, and by the way, thank you for shooting the first episode at my home. Usually I go to...
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the first interview I have here. So...
Do I get compensation?
Yeah. I don't know about this compensation.
No, where's
more of this, maybe.
I get water. That should be actually a nice sponsored by Jad. Come to Kaslik and drink water.
Yeah.
We're both fans of him. You had the privilege of including him on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I think there's no doubting the massive research that was done to produce something like that book. It's not an easy book to read, but it's full with information, as was Samir Asir's Tarikh Beirut. And Kamal Salibi's A House of Many Mansions. There's a lot of there's rich material to go back to. I'll acknowledge that we have a very, very old, outdated, strange way of governing. It's not fit maybe for the 21st century. It's a strange way of sort of having consensus along confessional lines. It probably worked at some point because Lebanon was not always hell. Maybe it was not always admired by everyone in the country. It always had its disadvantages, and you have to maybe even acknowledge that even in the best years of modern Lebanese history, there were many that suffered. Yeah. It's not shining all the time.
I had some dark days.
Sure. And the dark days for some could be the 1950s.
Yeah.
But for others, it's not that. It could be the 80s. And maybe for us now, we're living our darkest days.
Yeah.
But I take issue with blaming confessionalism for the war. I don't think sectarianism, the way we understand it now, this very ugly, pejorative word, which is part of our DNA to a degree, I don't think that is the reason why people killed each other. I think sectarianism may be like a supermarket sometimes, where you just go and you pick and choose the items that best reflect what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is because, to me, somebody who did not live in the 1970s, but now has spent years and years trying to explore what a state breakdown looks like and why states collapse and why violence reigns in a very quick period of time. In our case, it's really a few years that it went from an outdated model, but one that worked, to complete chaos.
Maybe the problem isn't confessionalism in itself. It's the impotence of the state. The state should break down any military movement against itself or between its social components.
Right. And
confessionalism led to the impotence of the state, but the impotence of the state is our problem and remains our problem.
So I'll clarify. Yeah. I think countries go through nightmares when you have components that are beyond the state's control. Yeah. And that's why I think 1970 is where the problems begin. Not the economic problems. The economic problems are old. Not the confessional structure. That is very old. It's the political violence that made us, in a way, unable to chart our destiny. That's 1970. Yeah. That's when a militia enters the country that is not under Lebanon's control. Now, I know Fatah and Hezbollah are not the same. I know Al-Kata'ib, Fatah and Hezbollah, they're not the same militia. Every other, Morabitun,
whomever. Yeah.
The Syrian occupation is not the same as Hezbollah, or for that matter, every political violence era in this country. It's not the same. But sub-state group اليوم that resembles that era is the same. Meaning
there's another resemblance. It's the same now as back then.
Yes.
The state allowed and didn't confront the bringing of another armed political faction. Hezbollah came during the civil war, so it was a different case. But during the late 60s, early 70s, the Palestinian presence in Lebanon was getting militarized and moving. The state had many opportunities to make a move, and it didn't. For better or for worse, I know in Lebanon we still have the memories, some are on this camp. For better or for worse, states are not always something that you would be approve of.
Yeah.
We were speaking about Saudi Arabia, for me, even Iran, and these kind of regimes I don't approve of.
Right.
But they are there. They have functions.
Right.
Our state is always impotent. And I believe the reason for this impotence is its invasion from confessions.